Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll take a few minutes and talk through some of the activities and response we went through over the last 2.5 weeks, and then I'll provide an update as to where we are in terms of our current state and then the next steps that we will move through. Just to start things off, because this has certainly been, I think, a good education for those of us who are new to Sudbury, as well as residents who maybe don't pay as close attention to this. But I just want to remind everyone of this graphic, which represents our approved winter maintenance standards, and that is the provincial minimum maintenance standard, and it is the basis on which our winter maintenance is budgeted and deployed. And so as you can see from the graphic, when a storm begins, we are immediately out on our main roads. Once 5 centimeters hits, main roads are being plowed for the duration. When there is 8 centimeters across the city, plows and sanders are out across all residential and rural roads for the duration of the storm. And then we move into sidewalks and bus stops. And so that is our standard response. And certainly as we conduct our review, we'll take a look at that response and what the options might be if we were to look at service levels. So going back to Sunday, March 15th, when everyone was aware that a major storm was coming, we had across all of our 5 works depots, city and contract plows deployed on all of our main roads, preparing for and responding to the snow that already started to fall. So from noon until when a general call out went out, we had 27 plow trucks out, along with 4 sidewalk plows. So this is what we were doing as the storm was on its way and the snow was starting to fall. The storm, as everyone will recall, really gained momentum quickly. By 4:30, snowfall was at 8 centimeters in all areas of the city, and our manager who was overseeing the response made the decision to do a general call out, which is when we bring in all of the operators and equipment to be able to do the plowing to all of our residential and side streets. And you can see on the slide just how many more. Essentially, we double the amount of capacity that we have, and then some, to get out there and start clearing neighborhoods. So that was at 4:30. And then by 5 p.m., we had declared a significant weather event, which many other communities did as well. Significant weather event really means that based on the level of snow that's falling, that we are unable to maintain our roads to the standard, the provincial maintenance standard and the standard service level that a council has approved. What it really means is that drivers should use caution because the roads are technically under repair. And by roads, I also include sidewalks. This is typical during a storm, as council has certainly seen, and again, used across the province. So 5 p.m., significant weather event. Between really the general call out, getting all of our equipment in that 4:30 to 5:30 time frame, the storm really picked up. And as we do our full report out in a couple of months, once we get through this, we'll have a better graphic and I think report out on how much snow was falling hourly, but it was immense. And so at 1 a.m., our roads manager, as well as our paramedics on-call person, made the decision to call our emergency management coordinator, who made the decision to wake me up, among others, and advise that we were really starting to become overwhelmed with the amount of snow, and with the winds gusting up to 70 kilometers an hour, visibility was practically nil. So you can see, as I've outlined some of the conditions, paramedics had become really overwhelmed. Ambulances were becoming stuck in the snow. Visibility was very low. Roads was having to send plows to support fire and EMS as they were responding. And roads had to make the decision to pull some of our equipment off the roads because the drivers couldn't see between the ditches and really weren't able to stay on the road safely. So there was a period of time for a few hours where visibility was so poor that we were really only able to clear in our well-lit areas of the city due to those safety issues. At the same time, Greater Sudbury Police Services was encouraging us, and we agreed to do a joint message to tell the public to stay off the roads because it simply wasn't safe, and police weren't going to be able to get out to people who were stranded. And at that time, we started to see closures of provincial highways all over the north. So just to touch a little bit on our emergency management, I mentioned in the last slide that our virtual emergency operations center went on a call. So every municipality is required to have an emergency management program under provincial legislation. Sudbury has had one for a long time. We have an emergency response plan that's approved by council. We have other response plans to hazards like floods and heat. And so we follow those plans, and under that, we follow, as many do across the province, an incident management structure to respond to emergencies. What that does is it establishes a formal structure for who does what in an emergency situation and the format of how our emergency operations center will operate. So I have a small graphic on the screen that kind of outlines some of the major areas of response and how they're divided up. So there would be an incident commander, there's a control group of leadership team members and chief of police and chief of fire and ambulance. We have operations section, in this case, primarily roads responding, and logistics and other supporting areas that support the response. So that's the structure that we moved into as soon as we saw that this was not just a regular winter storm. We needed to support across the organization and with other agencies a response to ensure the community was safe. So moving into Monday morning, very early Monday morning, realizing that the snow was continuing to fall, it was starting to shift to ice pellets and freezing rain. Despite bringing in all of our operations staff and contractors, crews were not able to keep up with the amount of snow that was falling even on the main roads, and therefore we're still unable, as it was starting to get more light out, to get to some of the side streets. In rural areas, we had some of our equipment getting stuck, and our emergency services were overwhelmed. So our EMS service was only responding to the highest priority calls, and then having the lower priority calls still in communication with the Provincial Communications Center, but holding unless they became urgent. Our fire services needed assistance getting to calls, and as people were waking up to alarms, fire became quite overwhelmed with calls relating to CO2 alarms as vents were blocked across the city given the amount of snowfall. So fire began to call in volunteer firefighters to pre-stage at some of our stations. And so that we call that upstaffing. And so basically ensuring that we had more than enough firefighters. But of course, very challenging for all staff and responders to get in given the weather. And the provincial highways were still closed. So moving to later that morning on Monday, we turned our attention to advising the public. Services were closed, many businesses were closed. Of course, many of us were well snowed in at our homes. Emergency services was still dealing with priority calls only, and we began working with the hospital as they had both essential workers that they needed to get in to be able to operate the emergency department, They had to cancel surgeries and appointments, non-urgent appointments, but had a list of dialysis patients that really needed their treatment life-saving treatment. And so we started working with HSN to assist in getting certain roads cleared or paths cleared, or assisting them in making their way into the hospital to try to ensure at least emergency services were still available. At the same time, of course, 9 a.m., more people waking up, fires certainly very overwhelmed with the CO2 calls, and really had not significantly gotten out into the side streets. But as we attempted to, our staff very quickly realized that our regular plows were not going to function. We're not going to be able to get through the snow that was in our subdivisions. So then we started working to source the graders and loaders we would need in order to clear the snow. So moving through the day, the snow turned to heavy freezing rain, which added this nice crust of extremely heavy ice on top of the snow, made it even more difficult to remove snow, pretty much taking the plows out of service other than on main roads, and again needing that special equipment to do all of the side streets and laneways, cul-de-sacs, anywhere else we would need plowing. So, the day continued with the weather, still storming. Fire and police stabilized fairly quickly in terms of being able to respond to emergencies. EMS still needed a fair bit of support with a plow or a grader or some kind of equipment needing to assist them as they went to calls. As we moved through the evening, we started to turn our attention to the coming days. When we were able to get equipment mobilized, the graders and the loaders for the subdivisions and the side streets, initially we were estimating it would take about 3 days to get a first pass on all of the streets. So, large call out to contractors. A lot of our contractors, some were already on board with the city, but many other contractors were busy on the first day of the storm, attending to their private clients. We continued to work with HSN, and we used our sidewalk plows to start to clear windrows, the snow at the end of people's driveways, as we were moving through doing some of this snow clearing, because it became obvious that these windrows would be overwhelming for residents, and this was not the normal situation where we would leave it to residents to try to clear it. So that was, really as we got into the evening on Monday when we first started being able to get all the right equipment out and tackle some of the side streets. As we moved into Tuesday, we did get a first pass on a lot of subdivisions and side streets, but we still had a lot of issues with our rural areas, of which there are many. We had equipment, even the different equipment, the heavier equipment, still getting stuck, and had to spend some time trying to identify what would actually work to get us through some of these areas. At the same time, we were realizing we had issues with our online snowplow map, which I think to some extent staff and to a large extent the public have come to rely on as a good information tool as to when your area was had been plowed or what areas might be coming up next. And so what we identified was that our plows have the technology on them that triggers automatically, the map to turn green if they go onto a street. And we had a lot of situations where plows went onto streets, realized they couldn't move that snow or got stuck and then had to leave. And yet it turned that green on the map. So very frustrating for the public. To some extent, staff were also relying on that to track which roads had been done. And so that did create some confusion. It will certainly be an area for follow-up that we address. And it's, it was one of those learnings where you have a great piece of technology that normally works really well, but in this situation, unfortunately hindered some of our response. We did engage a lot more contractors on the Tuesday. We started to talk to other municipalities. Most of the other northern municipalities were very bogged down even on Tuesday with their own significant weather events. North Bay was one that was not as heavily hit. It's important to understand that the other municipalities, most other municipalities rely on contractors for winter operations as well. And so really a lot of our discussions were them providing us with contractor lists. And we were able to engage a lot of contractors from outside of Sudbury thanks to that. At this point on Tuesday, we hadn't gotten to sidewalks. We weren't confident initially that our regular sidewalk plows would work, and they were being used to remove windrows. Laneways had not been cleared, but we did get 3 transit lines open. Some businesses started to reopen. Many highways reopened. But certainly Tuesday was a day when many people were still stuck in their homes and still digging out. On Wednesday, we got a lot more people out of their homes. A lot of city services reopened, most. The majority or a large majority of transit routes reopened, which allows a lot of essential workers to get to their jobs. Emergency services was, for the most part back to normal, and our fire team was able to start supporting hydrant clearing. This is when we started to turn our attention to working with the school bus consortium, thinking about school buses coming up the next week. And we started to redeploy a lot of our internal staff to assist us with managing contractors, the many contractors we had out on the roads, and to assist us with inspecting different areas to be able to manually verify where we had plowed and where we still needed work. We were finding more and more contractors were available as soon as we got to Wednesday, and so that really assisted us with ramping up the snow clearing by that day. On Thursday, we had another snow event, and so every time throughout this response in the last 2.5 weeks, where there has been additional snowfall or freezing rain, we have to redeploy or take some resources away from the work we're doing and send them back out onto the main roads and make sure that those are being maintained to bare pavement and being addressed before we remove other snow. By the Thursday, we were able to get a lot of the rural areas cleared, although we certainly still had some challenges with them. We did have a creative solution from the Sudbury Trail Plan, and we're able to use their groomers to do some snow clearing. And we were able to put together a task force of contractors to deal with laneways and cul-de-sacs, which is certainly an area that we've identified that needs some special attention in the future. One of the challenges with onboarding so many contractors for this response is that contractors that we don't normally use were not as familiar with our streets and our laneways. And so we ended up with a lot of situations where a contractor would think they had completed what we had provided them on their map, and only to find that they hadn't gone all the way down the laneway or missed, around the curve on a rural road. And so we definitely dealt with some challenges on that front, and another learning that we'll take away. We did manage to get through a lot of the subdivisions and side streets with a first pass, although, I don't think anyone was that happy with the state of their road on a first pass, but it did allow people to get out and go to work. And we really started turning our attention to clearing out bus transfer stations for school buses and access areas as that was quickly approaching. And really that was most of Thursday and Friday, was trying to clear laneways, cul-de-sacs, the places that we had missed, and prepare for school bus return. As we went into the weekend, we got even more snow and freezing rain. We continued the work we were doing with school buses, laneways, cul-de-sacs, widening roads, and the work, it just moved incredibly slow given the equipment that we were having to work with, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. As we moved into our second week last week, we had additional snowfall events. We had to do a lot of work last week to continue to work with the school bus consortium and the school boards. They had over 1,000 runs that they needed to ensure their buses could get through, and really challenging because some of our roads were as wide as we could get them without weeks of snow removal. And so they were working very closely with us. I think in the end, we ended up in a good place and got them all running this week, but a very challenging week last week. We operated 24/7, had all of the contractors engaged all of last week. We were able to get sidewalk plowing started, and our sidewalk plows were able to get through the snow, but at an incredibly slow pace compared to their normal plowing speed. So taking much, much longer than normal to plow the sidewalks. We diverted our waste collection crews to help us with hand shoveling all around the city. As sidewalks are cleared, we need to clear out intersections, stairs, transit shelters. And then, of course, in Sudbury and many other cities, but here especially it seems, pothole season quickly came upon us. Needed to address some of the potholes that we were uncovering as we plowed, and flood prevention, is top of mind. So a lot of different priorities coming all at once, and so coordinating across the teams how we address all of those priorities. Prior to the storm, we had spent a couple of weeks clearing catch basins and preparing for the spring melt. This storm undid all of that work, and so we had to go back out over the course of the last week and a half and make sure that we did that work. And now we are in week 3, and so we still have the significant weather event declaration in place. All of our contractors are still working right now. We are still running 24/7 this week to clear snow, to do the overnight sidewalk plowing. We're removing snow in the downtown. As I think everyone knows, we resumed waste collection today. We are still working with the bus consortium to address problem areas for them. Much work still happening in the subdivisions and side streets. Identifying areas that are still having challenges, the contractor issues, in addition to them not being familiar with roads. In some cases, they were dumping snow where they shouldn't, and so we're cleaning that up. And we're pothole patching and continuing to monitor and address flood-related issues. So I wanted to just briefly touch on a few frequently asked questions that we heard over the last couple of weeks. I know the mayor has addressed one of them, which is, why didn't we declare a state of emergency? As he indicated, declaring a state of emergency doesn't necessarily open up access to additional funds or resources. We can get those things with or without a state of emergency. We did move into an emergency response, as I outlined in this presentation. And a state of emergency is really typically used when you have prolonged issues of your emergency services, your hospital, public safety, overwhelmed for an extended period of time. And you really declare that when we need to make decisions that are going to be very different from business as usual. So if you recall during the pandemic, making decisions about closing businesses, telling people to stay home, passing bylaws or, at a higher level legislation that starts to impact people's rights and is not business as usual. So that is your typical state of emergency. In the pandemic, most municipalities declared a state of emergency 2 to 3 weeks into the pandemic. And so we were fully in an emergency response, but as we considered each day, we were seeing progress. We were seeing people getting out of their homes, people being able to access emergency services. And while we can certainly improve upon the pace of snow clearing and a better understanding of what equipment we would need in the future, we felt, because we were able to make that progress every day, that a state of emergency wouldn't have assisted. Another thing that we've heard is, why did we wait until the snow stopped to start clearing it? I think, as you've seen in the presentation today, that we were clearing the snow all through the storm until, in some cases, we couldn't get out anymore because of the visibility. There were a few hours where some of our equipment was not on the road, but the snow was falling, so quickly and was so heavy that very quickly you couldn't even see where it was cleared, a short time before. So we absolutely started clearing well before the heaviest of the snow, and we certainly picked it up again as quickly as possible when it was safe to do so. Why didn't we ask for help from other cities? We did. We spoke to our colleagues in other cities. As I mentioned, the majority of municipalities in the province rely heavily on contractors for winter response. They were able to put us in touch with some contractors whose equipment and personnel we have definitely used a lot of in our response. But we are in winter, and all of those municipalities and the province, MTO, they need their plows and operators for the ongoing winter response, the snowfalls, everything that was happening. It's very different than a response to, say, an ice storm, where we might send some forestry crews to a one-off event in a particular area, because the risk is low that another area is going to get that kind of ice event and need their personnel while they go respond. But in a winter, a snowfall, the other municipalities and the province need their people. So we were able to really take, I think, good advantage of the number of contractors within Greater Sudbury that came available, especially once we got past the first 24 to 48 hours of the snowfall. And we certainly have a long list of contractors that we know we can use going forward. Why is it taking so long to clear the snow? I talked a bit about this, about the type of equipment that we needed to use, and I think Mr. Rocco was kind enough to kind of share with me some of the stats. I think a lot of people have seen our graders out in our residential neighborhoods pushing the snow with the loader following up, clearing it. So a normal plow truck goes through a neighborhood at about 20 kilometers an hour, and a grader going through the neighborhood goes through at a pace of about 7 kilometers an hour. So it's very slow, painstaking work to remove the snow, scoop it up, put it somewhere. Very different than a typical run through the neighborhood with the plow and push it all to the side. And then, even with our sidewalks, as I mentioned, the sidewalk plows going through, normally they would go through at a pace of around 12 kilometers per hour. To be able to push this snow, they're going through at about 2 kilometers per hour. So the pace is slow because of the type of snow removal that we have to do. Our other northern cities saw the same thing. The city of Timmins had an enormous snowfall in late December into early January, had 6 weeks of a significant weather event, and took about that long to get all school buses back up and running. And they really saw that having to use that type of equipment to move the snow is what took weeks to really recover. And so that's something that we need to take a look at in future, especially given our changing climate change, our changing environment. The frequency of these types of events is what equipment we have on hand and how we can accelerate some of that work. And finally, some comments, rightly so, that it looked disorganized, the way in which we were responding. Why were plows driving right by my street and going off to another street? Why was the street next door plowed in the early days and mine not for 3 days? So, because, as I've outlined, we had changing priorities as the storm evolved, we didn't do our normal response to snow removal. We had to, in the early days, we were early hours, we were prioritizing emergency services. So someone's street might have gotten partially plowed or fully plowed because we were trying to get an ambulance through there. Others might have had their area cleared because we were working with the bus consortium and they prioritized widening that particular road. I think it's something that we will certainly look at in terms of the priorities and how we respond. But it really was day to day changing priorities to ensure we got as many people, first of all, the emergency services and the medical care they might need, and then, focusing on getting our school buses running again. But of course, getting people off their streets and out of their homes was also a priority. So it's been a challenge to balance all those priorities, and certainly something that we'll take a look at as we do our review. So just to kind of close up, next steps, we are still in the significant weather event. As I mentioned, with our roads not being to our standard width and not all of our sidewalks cleared, although we continue to work on them, technically we are not, meeting our standards, and therefore we will remain in the significant weather event until we can revert roads and sidewalks to that standard. Our emergency management structure, part of what's incorporated into that is to do an after-action review. So certainly that was already the plan, and we will do that in terms of our actual emergency response and evaluating that. One of the things that I know I'm going to ask our team to do is to put together and document a response plan specifically for a severe winter event like this. Most cities don't have a separate plan for winter events because we have an entire service area that handles winter operations, and therefore it's considered business as usual. But clearly this type of event is not business as usual. And so we will take a lot of the learnings and really document some of the good pieces of information that we've gained from this, the priorities, and so that'll be a piece of what we bring back for sure. I think we have a good opportunity to take a look at our normal winter operations response as a result of this. It gave me an opportunity to really see it in action, and there was a lot of really great work done by our team, but some things to take a look at. And, not just specific to roads, but also how some of the other areas handle their snow removal, their response, the teams that support roads in a response, whether that's fleet, or even some of our administrative areas, so we'll take a look at that. It'll take probably 30 to 60 days to get all of the invoices in and all of the financial impacts, and so we'll bring that as requested, and we'll bring that report back to council, assuming that this motion passes, and we will target to do that before the end of Q2 so that we have the time to put together all of the information. I've provided an overview of everything that happened. We'll certainly provide more detail in the final report. But to close, before I hand it back over to you, Mr. Mayor, I do want to acknowledge that we had a tremendous number of staff across the organization who really pulled together, who have been working nonstop for 2 weeks plus at this point, who cared deeply about people's safety and getting this community out of this weather event. And I really want to thank them for their dedication and hard work. We also had a lot of contractors step up in the community, and that has really helped us respond. And we had the community themselves step up. So a lot of really great things done for neighbors. A lot of great people in the community have stepped up to thank the people driving the equipment out in their neighborhood. And so really appreciate the community's patience. We will engage and get feedback through this review process. But really thanks to everyone. And we're not through it yet. We're not cleaned up fully yet. But we'll take the learnings and we'll continue to improve. So thank you.